The summer thunderstorm tore through Seattle like a blade wrapped in ice. Lightning split the sky above Miller's Diner at exactly 3:22 in the morning, and the rain hammered against the windows so hard it sounded like gravel being thrown by 1,000 angry hands. Sofia Hartley sat in the back corner booth, her fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Free refills. The only meal she could afford without touching the $5 in her pocket, and she needed that $5 to last until tomorrow night. The diner was empty except for the night cook in back, and old Pete, who had been nursing whiskey at the counter since midnight. Her worn backpack sat beside her on the vinyl seat, containing everything she owned in the world. 2 changes of clothes. A photograph of Emma that she looked at 4 times a day. A library card. A prayer card her mother had given her 23 years ago before the sickness took her. The photograph was what kept her moving. Emma was 8 years old, with dark curls and eyes that held too much knowing for her age. Sofia had been raising her for the past 2 years in silence, a crime nobody knew about except the one person who could destroy both their lives. Douglas Hale. The man who said he owned Sofia's debt, and therefore owned Sofia. And if Sofia could not produce $35,000 in 72 hours, he would take Emma from the back seat of the car where Sofia had been parking every night behind the Seattle Salvation Army shelter. She had $17 to her name 2 days ago. Now she had 5. The coffee shop door burst open and 3 men walked in with the storm following them like a living thing. Rain cascaded across the linoleum in a dark wave. The first 2 men wore black suits tailored so precisely they looked like armor. They scanned the empty diner the way soldiers scan a battlefield, hands resting near their sides where the bulges of weapons pressed against the expensive fabric. The third man stepped between them. Nicholas Bianchi was 6'2", broad-shouldered, 47 years old but carrying the weight of someone much older. His suit cost more than everything Sofia had owned in her entire life. His shirt was open at the collar, revealing a chest of solid muscle and a thin silver scar running from his collarbone toward his heart like a roadmap of violence survived. His hair was dark, slicked back, silvered at the temples. But it was his eyes that held the diner in a kind of hypnotized terror. They were the color of a winter storm, and they looked like they had seen things that would break ordinary people into pieces. The man called Rocco, the taller of the 2 lieutenants with the scarred jaw and the gold watch that caught the fluorescent lights, pulled out a chair and gestured for Nicholas to sit. Nicholas did not sit. His hand went to his chest. His breathing came in short, shallow pulls. The gray spread across his face like a flood. His legs buckled. His men lunged forward, but it was too late. Nicholas Bianchi, the man who controlled half of Seattle's underground, the man who had ordered the execution of 17 people without raising his voice, collapsed at the counter like a puppet with its strings cut. His head cracked against the edge of a bar stool. He lay there, absolutely still, his expensive suit crumpled, his face the color of death itself. Rocco and Luca froze. Their hands went to their weapons, but there was no enemy to fight. There was nothing to shoot. For the first time in 15 years of working for this man, they had no idea what to do. Sofia heard the sound of her coffee cup hitting the floor before she knew she had moved. The ceramic shattered across the linoleum in 3 pieces, and she was already running, her worn sneakers slapping against the checkered floor. She dropped beside him, her hands moving on pure instinct. She tilted his head back, checked for breathing. Nothing. The panic in her chest felt like drowning on dry land. "Don't touch him," Rocco said. His voice was low, dangerous, but it was also the voice of a man who had just watched his world tilt. Sofia did not hear him. She interlocked her fingers and placed them on Nicholas's sternum. His ribs felt like iron beneath her palms. She pushed hard. Once. Twice. 15 brutal compressions, her arms shaking, counting without speaking because her mother had taught her this in a different lifetime, in a different world, when Sofia had been a nursing student with hope and a future and a mother who believed in her. 1 compression. 2. 3. "What is she doing?" Luca whispered. Rocco's hand moved toward his gun. "She is contaminating the crime scene." But Sofia kept pushing, kept counting, because somewhere in the wreckage of her life she remembered that people mattered. That even when the world told you that you were nobody, that your suffering was invisible and your love was worthless, human beings still had a heart that needed to keep beating. She delivered 2 rescue breaths, her mouth covering his, tasting blood and expensive cologne and the metallic fear of death itself. She compressed his chest again. 20 compressions. 21. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and cold and infinite. On the 23rd compression, Nicholas gasped. His eyes flew open like a man waking from a nightmare. His body convulsed. He sucked in air like he was drowning in it, choking, his hands clawing at the empty space around him. Sofia fell backward onto the diner floor, her hands shaking so hard she could not steady them. She was breathing like she had run 1,000 miles. Nicholas rolled onto his side and vomited onto the linoleum. Rocco and Luca stood motionless, watching this impossible thing unfold. They had trained for 16 years to protect this man from bullets and poison and betrayal, and none of that training had prepared them for the moment when a homeless woman in a faded Seattle Sounders shirt had brought him back from the edge of death itself. Nicholas sat up slowly, his eyes still unfocused, his breathing still ragged. He looked at Sofia like she was a ghost that had walked out of the walls. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, or like he had forgotten what a human being could do. "Call Dr. Vitoli," he said, his voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "Do not move her." Rocco's phone was already to his ear. His fingers trembled on the keys. Sofia's hands were still shaking. She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. Red nail polish chipped from 2 months of washing dishes. Calluses on her palms from years of work. Blood under her fingernails where she had been working double shifts, triple shifts, any shift available, trying to earn enough to save Emma. Nicholas looked at her for a long moment. His men had taught him the language of power. But in that moment, sitting on the cold linoleum of an empty diner at 3:22 in the morning, drenched in his own sweat and vomit, staring at this woman who had touched him when the entire world had already abandoned her, Nicholas Bianchi felt something crack open inside his chest. It felt like mercy. It felt like a curse. Outside, the thunder rolled across the city like the sound of God clearing his throat. The rain kept falling. The storm kept coming. And Sofia Hartley, who had walked into Miller's diner with $5 in her pocket and the weight of impossible choices crushing her down, sat on the floor of a stranger's collapse and felt the first shift in the machinery of fate beginning to turn. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what comes tomorrow. Now let us go back 72 hours earlier, to the moment when Sofia Hartley stood in a gas station bathroom at 5 in the morning, staring at 5 crumpled bills in her trembling hand and the final notice letter that had been taped to her windshield. The neon sign outside the bathroom window flickered pink and white. Sofia's reflection in the mirror looked like a woman made of glass about to shatter. 29 years old but looking decades older. Her dark hair pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin of her forehead. Her brown eyes hollow and burning with a desperation that no amount of sleep could ever fix. The debt collector's letter was in her other hand. Final notice, it said across the top in letters thick as blood. $35,000. 72 hours. Or Douglas Hale would take Emma. Her daughter. The one bright thing she had pulled from the darkness of her own life. Sofia looked at the $5 again. The bills were damp from her sweat. She needed to turn $5 into $35,000 in 3 days, or lose the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. Outside the bathroom, the highway stretched toward Seattle like a road running toward hell itself. The neon sign outside the bathroom window flickered pink and white. Sofia's reflection in the mirror looked like a woman made of glass about to shatter. 29 years old but looking decades older. Her dark hair pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin of her forehead. Her brown eyes hollow and burning with a desperation that no amount of sleep could ever fix. The debt collector's letter was in her other hand. Final notice, it said across the top in letters thick as blood. $35,000. 72 hours. or Douglas Hale would take Emma. Sofia looked at the $5 again. The bills were damp from her sweat. She needed to turn $5 into $35,000 in 3 days, or lose the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally. Outside the bathroom, the highway stretched toward Seattle like a road running toward hell itself. She splashed water on her face. Cold. Shocking. Real. The fluorescent lights above her head buzzed like dying insects. In the mirror, she watched herself become someone else, someone smaller, someone who had learned to disappear in plain sight. She pulled her brown hair back tighter, twisted it into a knot so severe it looked like punishment. This was the version of herself the world needed to see. Not the woman. The ghost. Emma was waiting in the stall behind her, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The pink shirt with the cartoon butterfly was stained at the collar. Sofia knelt down and buttoned a clean shirt over it, the one she had washed in the gas station sink yesterday. Emma yawned, her small face creased with sleep, her 7-year-old eyes too knowing for her age. "Are we going home today?" Emma asked. Sofia's throat tightened. "Not today, sweetheart. But soon. I promise." "You always say soon," Emma said. "Not mean. Just true." Sofia pulled her daughter close and breathed in the smell of her hair. Coconut shampoo from a dollar store. The cheapest thing she could find that made Emma smell like a child instead of like the shelter. Instead of like despair. They drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Franklin Elementary. The 2004 Honda Civic rattled and wheezed like an old animal. Sofia had paid cash for it 3 years ago, $400 from money she had hidden from Douglas Hale, penny by penny, day by day. The engine knocked. The check engine light had been on so long she no longer noticed it. The driver's side window didn't open. The passenger mirror was held on with duct tape. But it was theirs. It was home. At the school's front gate, Sofia knelt on the cold sidewalk and looked into Emma's face. The girl's eyes were the same brown as her own, but lighter somehow. "Cleaner. I packed you extra crackers today," Sofia said. "The good ones with the cheese. Keep them in your backpack and eat them at lunch, okay? Don't trade them." Emma nodded seriously and clutched her backpack, a hand-me-down from the shelter's donation bin. Inside were 3 pairs of socks, 2 shirts, the crackers, and a drawing Emma had made, a house with a red door and yellow flowers. A house that did not exist. "Mama, when we get the real house, can we get a dog?" Sofia's vision blurred. She kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby. When we get the real house, we can get a dog. We can get anything you want." "I just want you to not be sad," Emma said. Sofia felt something break inside her chest, the kind of break that does not make a sound because it happens in the chambers of the heart where sound cannot travel. She stood up and watched Emma disappear through the school doors, her small body swallowed by the hallway, and then Sofia was alone in the parking lot at 6:08 in the morning with nothing but the weight of an impossible arithmetic. She returned to the car and found it immediately. The envelope, white and official, tucked under the wiper blade like a disease. Her hands were shaking before she even opened it. She already knew what it would say. Final notice. Douglas Hale's name was embossed at the top in gold letters that must have cost more than Sofia had earned in the last 6 months. The letter detailed her debt with the precision of an executioner's measurement. $35,000 owed for housing and protection services rendered from 2016 to 2024. Interest compounded monthly. Penalties for non-cooperation. A signature line dated 8 years ago, her handwriting barely recognizable, a signature she had made with a pen that Hale had handed her while standing very close, close enough that she could smell his cologne and his menace. Payment due in 72 hours. Or collateral would be collected as agreed in the original contract. The collateral was Emma. Sofia sat in the driver's seat with the letter in her lap and tried to breathe. The rain began to fall. Slow drops at first, then faster, then a torrent. Water streaked the windshield. The wipers squeaked back and forth, a sound like something pleading. 8 years ago, Sofia had been 19 years old and running from a man who had learned to use his fists the way other men used words. Her mother was dead. Her father had disappeared the night Sofia turned 16. She had $300 in a backpack and a certainty that she would not survive another week on the streets. That was when Douglas Hale found her. That was when he smiled. He had seemed so powerful, so sure, so capable of making the world stop hurting her. "I can help you," he had said. "I have a place. Good work. You would have a room. Food. Safety." He had not mentioned the warehouse on the waterfront where he kept the women. He had not explained the men who came at night, wealthy men in expensive suits who smelled like power and knew exactly how to hurt someone without leaving marks that would show under long sleeves. He had not told her that every dollar she earned would be claimed by the debt, that the debt would only grow, that the compound interest on suffering is always exponential. He had just smiled and held out a hand, and she had taken it like a drowning person takes a rope. Sofia opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Her shoes splashed through puddles. The water was cold, shocking against her skin. She walked 3 blocks to the pawn shop on Pike Street, the one where the owner knew better than to ask questions. She had only one thing of value left. Her mother's wedding ring. Gold. Thin and delicate. Her mother had worn it for 42 years, until the cancer took her. Sofia had kept it hidden from Hale all this time, sewn into the hem of a pillowcase, waiting for a moment when she might need to choose between survival and memory. This was that moment. The pawn shop owner was a woman named Ruth, maybe 70, with reading glasses on a chain and hands that trembled slightly when she handled the ring. She turned it over under a lamp, examining the hallmark. 14 carat, Ruth said. Gold's price is good right now. I can give you $200. $200. Sofia took the money, 5 $20 bills, crisp and new, and walked out into the rain with her mother's ring gone and $34,800 still separating her from Emma. The arithmetic was suffocating. $5 from before. $200 from the ring. $205 total. 3 days to find $34,800 more. It was impossible. It was actually, mathematically, verifiably impossible. She had no family. No credit. No legal existence that Douglas Hale had not already poisoned. The police would not help her because the paper she had signed said she had consented to everything. The shelters would feed her, but Emma would end up in foster care, and Sofia knew exactly where foster children went when men like Hale knew exactly what to pay for them. There was only one option left. Run. Disappear. Take Emma and get on a Greyhound bus headed somewhere he would never find them. But that meant abandoning everything. Her job at the diner. The small progress she had made. The fragile hope that somehow, someday, she might actually build a life instead of just surviving one. She sat in the car with the rain drumming on the roof and the water running down the windshield and tried to imagine which choice would hurt less. Running meant losing the future. Staying meant losing her daughter. The storm was building. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant artillery. Sofia could feel the electricity in the air, the way the world was holding its breath before something terrible happened. She did not know that across the city, in an underground poker room beneath a restaurant called Marcello's, a man with ice-gray eyes was preparing for a meeting that would change both of their lives. She did not know that Nicholas Bianchi, the most powerful crime lord in the Pacific Northwest, had spent the last 15 years building an empire specifically designed to erase people like Douglas Hale. She did not know that fate was a thing that could be bent if you were willing to bleed for it. She only knew that she had 72 hours and the weight of the impossible was crushing her down like a stone. The rain drummed against the diner window like fingers demanding entry. Miller's Diner sat empty at 3:22 in the morning, fluorescent lights humming their lonely song, and Sofia Hartley occupied a corner booth with a cup of black coffee she'd made herself an hour ago, now cold and bitter and the only thing she could afford. $5 remained in her wallet. $5 to stretch across 3 days while Emma slept in the car outside, curled under a blanket that smelled like mildew and desperation. She had a notebook open. On one page, a list of shelters in Oregon. On another, the math that would not balance. $35,000 by 3 p.m. tomorrow, or Douglas Hale would walk into Lincoln Elementary School and take Emma from the second-grade classroom like a man claiming a package that belonged to him. He would sign the papers he had already prepared. He would drive away with a child who had called Sofia Mommy for 2 years, and the law would not stop him because the papers Sofia had signed said she had consented to everything: the debt, the payment structure, the collateral clause, written in language intentionally confusing enough to trap someone desperate enough to read it. The door chimed. Wind burst through the entrance like something alive and angry, carrying the smell of wet concrete and the electricity that comes before lightning. A man entered wearing a suit that cost more than Sofia's car, followed by 2 others whose shoulders filled the doorway. The fabric of his jacket was Italian wool, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar to reveal a chest marked with a thin silver chain. His hair was dark, graying at the temples, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and cold and ancient with the weight of decisions that could not be unmade. The waitress, Marie, straightened immediately. "Mr. Bianchi." "Good to see you, sir." "The usual." Nicholas Bianchi moved to the counter with the deliberate grace of a man who had learned, long ago, that every step was a statement. Behind him, Rocco and Luca took positions by the door like sentries guarding a tomb. Nicholas ordered coffee. "Black." "Nothing else." Sofia kept her eyes on her notebook, but her attention had narrowed to a single point: the man at the counter. She had heard the name whispered at the shelter. Bianchi. The word carried weight. The word meant danger. He reached for the coffee cup as Marie slid it across the counter, and his hand trembled. A small movement, barely visible, but Sofia had learned to notice small movements because small movements often preceded the arrival of pain. Nicholas set the cup down without drinking. His breathing changed. Shallowed. His jaw tightened and his other hand gripped the counter edge hard enough that his knuckles blanched white. Rocco saw it. His body language shifted from relaxed to alert in the space of a heartbeat. He touched Luca's arm. They both knew what was happening before it happened. The color drained from Nicholas's face like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood pour out. His coffee cup tumbled. Ceramic shattered against linoleum. Nicholas collapsed against the counter and then to the floor, his expensive suit hitting the black and white checkered tiles, his breathing erratic and shallow, his left arm pressed against his chest as though he could hold his own heart inside by force of will alone. Rocco lunged forward. "Get him water, but his words scattered. This was a medical emergency, and Rocco had been trained in many things: how to move through shadows, how to make men forget they had ever been brave, how to follow orders without question, but not this. Not someone broken in a way that bullets could not fix. Sofia moved without thinking. No calculation, no consideration of risk. She dropped her notebook, stood, and sprinted across the diner. Her shoes splashed through spilled coffee. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands moving with the muscle memory of a woman who had learned CPR 3 years ago from a video on a borrowed phone, a woman who had trained because Emma had asthma and Sofia knew that knowledge was the only insurance the poor could afford. She ripped his shirt open, buttons scattering. Luca's hand went to his gun, but Rocco held him back with a gesture. "Let her work." Sofia locked her hands together and positioned them over his sternum. Her arms came down like a piston, brutal and desperate, her entire body weight behind each compression. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted aloud, her voice steady even as her hands shook. His ribs bent under her palms. She tilted his head back and delivered rescue breaths, tasting the cigar smoke and expensive cologne, then returned to compressions. His lips were turning blue. The color of the sky before a storm. "Come on," she gasped. "Come on, come on, come on." 23 compressions. His body seized. He gasped and his eyes flew open, pale gray eyes that locked directly onto hers, and in that instant something passed between them that neither could name. A woman with tangled hair and desperation carved into the lines of her face. A man whose entire world had contracted to a single point: survival. His breathing resumed, ragged and uneven but present. Marie had already called 911. Her voice on the phone was distant now, professional, describing the address and the emergency. Sofia backed away, suddenly aware of what she had done, touched a man who radiated danger, interfered in something that belonged to other worlds, worlds where people like her did not survive interference. She grabbed her backpack from the booth. Her notebook fell to the floor. She didn't stop to retrieve it. "He needs a hospital," she whispered, and she ran into the rain. The Mercedes was pulling away from the curb before the ambulance arrived. Nicholas Bianchi sat in the back seat with Rocco supporting his shoulders, oxygen mask obscuring his face, but his eyes remained fixed on the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watched a woman disappear into the darkness of downtown Seattle, moving like she was accustomed to vanishing, like being unseen was the only survival strategy she had ever known. "Find her," he said, voice rough beneath the oxygen mask. "Find out who she is." Rocco exchanged a look with Luca in the front seat. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Bianchi, he had never heard him sound like this, like something inside him had been fundamentally altered, like a wall had cracked and light was pouring through. "Yes, sir," Rocco said. The city streets gleamed wet and black as they drove toward the hospital. 11 hours later, Sofia sat in her 2007 Honda Civic parked 3 blocks from Lincoln Elementary School, watching children spill out through the doors at dismissal. Her hands were still trembling. They had not stopped trembling since 3:30 a.m., when she had run from Miller's diner into the rain. Emma emerged from the building holding hands with another child, both of them laughing at something, both of them existing in a world that still contained joy, and Sofia felt something inside her chest expand and contract simultaneously, the sensation of holding something too precious and too fragile. Then the Mercedes pulled alongside. Rocco stepped out of the driver's seat. He was a large man with kind eyes and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and he wore a suit that probably cost more than Emma's entire year of education. Sofia's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to start the engine, to pull into traffic, to drive and keep driving until the city disappeared behind them. Instead, she put her hand on Emma's shoulder. The girl looked up at her with a question forming on her face. "Miss Hartley," Rocco said, his voice gentle in a way that made it more terrifying, not less. "My employer would like to speak with you. He wants to say thank you." "I don't know who that is," Sofia lied, and her voice cracked on the words. Rocco smiled. "It was Saud, somehow. The man whose life you saved. Will you come?" Sofia looked at Emma. Emma looked back with absolute trust, the kind of trust that could destroy you if you let it. She started the engine. "Get in the car, baby." Rocco didn't stop her. The Bianchi estate sat perched above Lake Washington, a mansion constructed from stone and money and the kind of permanence that people like Sofia would never own. Marble floors stretched toward infinity. Paintings hung on walls, real paintings, she realized, not reproductions, and the light came from fixtures that probably cost more than her car. Everything was clean. Everything was still. Everything was a photograph of a life she would never inhabit. A woman with salt and pepper hair greeted them at the door. "Welcome, Miss Hartley." "Young Emma. Please follow me." The study smelled like leather and time. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and afternoon light poured through windows that looked out toward the water. Nicholas Bianchi stood by the glass, turned when she entered, and Sofia saw immediately that he was not the same man who had collapsed on the diner floor. This man was solid. This man was dangerous. But his eyes were gentle. "You ran before I could thank you," he said. Sofia stayed near the door, her hand on Emma's shoulder. "I didn't need thanks." "Is that all?" Nicholas gestured toward leather chairs. "Please. Sit." "Your daughter?" "My niece." The lie came automatically. "We should go." "How long has it been since she ate?" The question hung in the air. Emma's small hand gripped Sofia's leg. Nicholas nodded to Rocco, who produced a plate of cookies, real cookies, store-bought, the kind with chocolate chips and a glass of milk. Emma's eyes widened to the size of coins. She hadn't had cookies in 7 months. "When did you last eat?" Nicholas asked Sofia. Her jaw tightened. "We're fine. You saved my life and then you ran. You carried the child and you ran into the rain at 3 in the morning. That is not the behavior of someone who is fine." He sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and simply waited. Sofia wanted to move toward the door. Instead, she felt herself sitting, felt Emma climbing into her lap, felt the world shifting on its axis. "Tell me what you need," Nicholas said. The confession came in pieces. The shelter. The job at the diner. The years before, when the life she had built with Emma was held together by wire and prayer and the kind of desperation that doesn't show on the surface until something cracks it open. By the time she finished, Rocco had brought a meal, pasta and bread and salad, the kind of food that tastes like love tastes to people who have never experienced either. Emma ate. Silently. Completely. Like she was filling a well that had been empty for her entire life. "I chose the family business over my own blood," Nicholas said, and Sofia realized he was sharing his own pain, trading stories like they were currency. "My brother and I. He chose money from the Vitoli family. I chose the 200 people who depended on me. I put a bullet in his knee and exiled him. Some would call me a monster for it." Sofia looked at him directly for the first time since sitting down. His eyes were ancient. His eyes had seen things that could not be unseen. "You protected people who depended on you," she said. "That's not monstrous. That's impossible. That's love, and love always costs everything." Something crossed his face. His men had never heard him speak this way to anyone. Never seen him listen like the words mattered more than oxygen. Then Sofia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, 60 hours remaining. "I know where Emma goes to school. Consider your options carefully. DH." Sofia's blood turned to ice. She stood abruptly, gathering Emma, reaching for the backpack. "What happened?" Nicholas was on his feet immediately. "We have to go. Thank you for the meal." But Nicholas moved to stand between her and the door. Not blocking. Just present. "Sofia. Someone is threatening you." She shook her head. "You can't help." "Then tell me what you're running from." The words came out shattered. "I owe someone $35,000. I have 60 hours or he takes Emma. I have $5 in my wallet and no way to make the kind of money that could save her, and the only choice left is to disappear." Nicholas's jaw tightened. "Douglas Hale." Sofia's head snapped up. "You know him." "I know that he is a predator. A trafficker. A man who preys on women exactly like you, desperate, alone, with no one to protect them." Nicholas's voice had turned to ice. "This debt is a weapon. It was always meant to be a weapon. The law doesn't see it that way. I signed papers. Then we will make the law see differently." Sofia laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I'm a homeless woman who you've never met." Nicholas stepped closer. "You're the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to walk past me. Every reason to protect yourself first. You gave everything when you had nothing. That is not nobody." "You don't know what I am," Sofia whispered. "What's been done to me?" She turned around. Slowly, she removed her jacket. Lifted her shirt. The scars covered her back like a map of hell, thin white lines, thick raised welts, cigarette burns organized in patterns that spoke of deliberate cruelty. 8 years of payment structure. 8 years of Hale's hands remaking her body into something broken. "Hale's bookkeeping," she said quietly. "Every time I didn't earn enough. Every time I questioned him." She dropped her shirt, put her jacket back on. When she turned around, Nicholas's hands were shaking. Rocco had never seen his employer shake. "No," Nicholas said. You're a survivor. And Hale will answer for every single mark. The sound came then, a sound that would change everything. 3 blocks away, in a restaurant with wine lists longer than novels, Catherine Mercer received a call from one of Hale's men. The Hartley girl. She's at the Bianchi house. Catherine's smile was the smile of someone who had just identified a problem and knew exactly how to solve it. She hung up the phone and began to plan Sofia's destruction. The rain hammered against the windshield like a fist demanding entry. Sofia sat motionless in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had turned white, watching the headlights cut through the darkness of the parking lot behind St. Mark's shelter. The dashboard clock read 2:13 a.m. 42 hours left. The backpack lay on the passenger seat next to Mr. Hopsworth, Emma's stuffed rabbit with the crooked ear, packed and ready for a disappearance that felt inevitable now. Nicholas stepped out of the Mercedes into the downpour. He walked to her car without hesitation, his cashmere coat already soaked, rain streaming down his face. He tapped the window. She rolled it down, and the sound of the storm rushed in, the hiss of water on asphalt, the distant rumble of thunder moving closer. "You're running," he said. Not a question. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" His voice was steady, but there was something in it, something that cut through her fear like a blade through silk. "For you. I'm a liability." Catherine was right. You're the woman I love." The words hung in the rain between them, impossible and real. Sofia stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know you gave CPR to a stranger when you had $5.72 to save a child. I know you've survived 8 years of hell and still have gentleness in you. I know that an hour ago I made a call, and right now Douglas Hale's entire world is ending." Sofia's phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again. Then 3 more times in rapid succession. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. News alerts flooded the screen: FBI raids waterfront warehouse, human trafficking ring exposed. Seattle authorities announce major trafficking bust. Multiple arrests in alleged trafficking conspiracy. "How?" she breathed. Nicholas reached into the car through the window and took her hand. His skin was cold from the rain, but his grip was solid. "Rocco's contacts in the bureau have been building a case for months. I gave them the final piece tonight: financial records linking Hale and Catherine to trafficking networks in 6 states. Records we found in his office 3 hours ago. It's over, Sofia. The debt is dead." She couldn't process it. The debt, that invisible weight that had crushed her for 8 years, that had kept her in that car, that had made her choose between food and safety and Emma's education, the debt was simply gone. "But that's not all," Nicholas continued. He nodded to Rocco, who had emerged from the second vehicle and now stood in the rain holding a phone. He played a recording, and the sound that came through the speaker made Sofia's stomach turn to ice. Douglas Hale's voice. Screaming. "No, no, please, I'll pay, I'll disappear, I'll leave the country, just please." Then other voices. Cold. Unfamiliar. "The Bianchi family sends their regards. You touched something that belongs to them now." The sound of dragging. A car door slamming. Silence. Sofia covered her mouth with both hands. "What did you do?" "The Vitoli family owed me a favor from 15 years ago. A favor I collected tonight. Hale is no longer anyone's concern." Nicholas's voice was quiet, matter-of-fact, but there was steel underneath it. "He will never be seen again." "And Catherine?" Sofia's voice shook. Nicholas showed her a video on his phone. Catherine Mercer in handcuffs, FBI agents on either side of her, walking down the marble steps of her mansion as news cameras flashed like strobing lightning. The headline beneath the video read, "Mercer arrested, federal conspiracy charges, 40 years minimum." Sofia watched Catherine's face as she was guided into the back of an unmarked car, watched the woman who had humiliated her in front of Seattle's elite finally understand that her power was an illusion, that her money meant nothing against the machinery of justice. Catherine's social empire, built on the backs of women like Sofia, was collapsing in real time. The rain poured harder. Sofia looked up at Nicholas through the windshield, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" He leaned down so his face was level with hers. "Because you're worth it. Because I've spent 8 years believing I'm just the monster who destroyed my own family, and you looked at a broken man on the floor of a diner and saw someone worth saving. You didn't see the money. You didn't see the power. You saw someone who needed help, and you gave everything you had." He held out his hand. "Don't run. Stay. Let me prove you're not alone anymore." Sofia looked at his hand, at the simple gold ring on his fourth finger, at the strength in his wrist and forearm. She thought of Emma sleeping safely at the estate with Maria. She thought of Mr. Hopsworth on the passenger seat. She thought of the bus ticket still in the glove compartment, the one-way ticket to Los Angeles and another 8 years of running. She took his hand. Nicholas pulled her from the car, and in the parking lot behind the shelter where she had lived for the past 3 years, he held her. Rain soaked through both their clothes. His heart was pounding against her ribs, or maybe it was her own heart. She couldn't tell anymore where she ended and he began. "I'm terrified," she said into his chest. "I know," he replied. "So am I." Rocco and Luca stood by the Mercedes, letting them have this moment. In 15 years of service, neither man had ever seen their employer vulnerable. They had seen him make decisions that altered the landscape of Seattle's underworld. They had seen him negotiate with rival families, seen him move with absolute certainty through rooms full of dangerous men. But they had never seen him hold a woman like she was the only thing preventing him from drowning. At dawn, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sofia sat in Nicholas's office at the estate with a lawyer and a stack of papers. The debt was officially erased from every record. Hale's accounts were frozen. Catherine's legal team had abandoned her. No attorney wanted to be associated with someone facing 40 years in federal prison. But the papers that mattered most were different. Adoption papers. Nicholas had prepared them weeks ago, the moment he understood what Sofia was fighting for. He had prepared for a future he wasn't sure he had the right to want. "Emma will need to understand what's happening," the lawyer was saying. "The transition from informal guardianship to legal adoption requires her consent, even at her age. Children can be more perceptive than adults give them credit for." Sofia nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. 3 hours earlier, she had called Maria and asked her to bring Emma to the estate. The girl was downstairs now with Rocco, who was apparently very good at explaining complicated things to 8-year-olds. When Sofia walked into the library, Emma was sitting on Rocco's shoulders, and he was pointing out different paintings on the wall. Emma was laughing, that pure, unself-conscious laugh that Sofia hadn't heard in weeks. "Vivi!" Emma called out, using the nickname she had created for Sofia when she was barely speaking. The word had evolved from Viviana, even though that wasn't Sofia's name, but Emma had decided it was, and Sofia had never corrected her. Sofia picked her up and held her close. "Hi, baby. I missed you. Rocco says we live here now. Forever and ever." Sofia looked at Rocco over Emma's shoulder. He gave a slight nod. The conversation had already happened. "Yes," Sofia said, her voice breaking slightly. "We do. Forever and ever." "And Nicholas?" "And Nicholas," Sofia confirmed. She set Emma down and watched as the girl ran to Nicholas, who had appeared in the doorway. He scooped her up without hesitation, and Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "Rocco said you saved us. Like in the stories." Nicholas looked at Sofia over the top of Emma's head. "No," he said quietly. "She saved me. We saved each other." Outside, the September sun climbed higher in the sky. The rain had passed. The storm that had defined the last 72 hours had finally broken. In the distance, the Space Needle caught the light and held it, a beacon of silver against the blue. Sofia stood in that library, surrounded by books and light and safety and the sound of Emma's innocent laughter, and understood something that had taken her 8 years to believe: survival is not measured in dollars or days. It's measured in the person willing to stand with you in the rain and say, "You are not alone." The clock on the wall showed 7:14 a.m. She had made it. Not just through the 72 hours, but through everything that came before and everything that would come after. The debt was gone. The predator was gone. The nightmare had finally ended. And Mr. Hopsworth, that $2 rabbit with the crooked ear, was waiting on the passenger seat of her car, ready to be carried into a new life, into safety, into home. The library was silent except for the sound of Emma's breathing, steady and peaceful in sleep. Sofia sat in the cottage's main room, her hands trembling as she held the envelope. The letter inside bore the state seal, official and irrevocable. Her debt to Douglas Hale, the $35,000 that had owned her for 8 years, was declared null and void. Fraudulent. Criminal. Erased. She read the words again, unable to believe them. $47,319 in total damages returned to victims. Catherine Mercer's trial had ended 3 weeks ago. The sentencing, 22 years federal prison. Hale himself had vanished into the night with rival families, and the warehouse on the waterfront where Sofia had lived in darkness was now an empty shell wrapped in crime scene tape. Outside, September rain fell gently against the windows of the guest cottage, a soft, cleansing rain so different from the storm that had nearly drowned them all. The knock was gentle. Sofia knew it would be Nicholas before she opened the door. He stood there in a dark charcoal sweater, rain beading on his shoulders, his dark eyes searching her face. "You have not slept," he said. "Not a question. I got this today." She handed him the letter with fingers still trembling slightly. "It's official. I'm free." Nicholas read it slowly, his jaw tightening. When he looked up, something ancient and tender moved behind his eyes. "You were always free, Sofia. The paperwork is just catching up to the truth." He stepped inside, closing the door against the rain. The cottage smelled like Emma's strawberry shampoo and the lemon tea Sofia had made hours ago. Through the open doorway to the bedroom, they could see Emma sleeping with Mr. Hopsworth tucked under her arm, the rabbit with the crooked ear that had somehow survived everything. "Come with me," Nicholas said, taking Sofia's hand. His palm was warm, steady, exactly what she needed to feel. They walked to the porch, and Nicholas pulled her close, his arms settling around her shoulders. The lake beyond the garden was grey and luminous in the rain. Fireflies blinked weakly in the humidity, their light struggling against the darkness. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night in my study?" Nicholas said quietly. "You asked me why. Why would I help you? Why would a man like me risk anything for a woman I had just met?" Sofia nodded. She remembered every word of that night, Nicholas in his black suit, firelight catching the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, his men frozen outside the door while he listened to her story. The answer was simple, he continued. Because Douglas Hale and everyone like him spend their lives convincing women they are worth less than the price of their suffering. They take children and told them they are defective. They take your hope and call it realistic. And when a woman like you, terrified, broken, with $5 to your name, still refuses to disappear, still refuses to let them win, that is when I knew I had to fight. Sofia turned to face him, rain catching in her dark hair. "I keep waiting for the catch. For you to realize what a mistake this is. A broken homeless woman with enough trauma to fill a library is not what a man in your position." "Stop." His voice was like a blade cutting through water. "You are not broken. You are a warrior. Warriors carry scars. Your scars do not define you, Sofia. Your survival does." He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized was falling. When he kissed her, it was tender and slow, like he was asking permission. Like he still could not quite believe she was real. 8 years of isolation melted into that kiss. 8 years of hands on her that were violent, cruel, transactional. And now this gentleness. Choice. A man who had chosen her not despite her damage but because of her refusal to stay damaged. When they separated, Sofia rested her forehead against his. "How did we get here?" she whispered. "6 months ago I was planning to run. To disappear so I would not ruin your life." "You punch me back to life," Nicholas said, and she felt him smile against her hair. "Literally. That night in the diner, your hand connected with my chest and my heart remembered how to beat. Some men have epiphanies. Some men find religion. I found you." Inside the cottage, a clock chimed softly. The sound of the rain intensified, drumming harder against the windows. Sofia and Nicholas stood on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the lake, the fireflies, the slow dissolution of storm clouds. 3 months before, in that same cottage, Emma had been doing homework at the kitchen table when Nicholas arrived carrying takeout containers. The girl had jumped up immediately. "Nick! Did you bring the dumplings? Would I dare show up without them?" He had ruffled her hair, and Sofia had watched from the counter, her chest so full of gratitude it hurt to breathe. They had eaten like a normal family. Not perfect, there was still the occasional nightmare when Emma woke sobbing, still the moments when Sofia flinched at unexpected movements, but real. Actual, everyday normal. Nicholas teaching Emma chess in the library. Rocco pretending to lose at Go Fish. Luca bringing her books about marine biology because she had mentioned once that she liked dolphins. Maria, the Bianchi estate cook who had been there for 32 years, had taken one look at Emma on that first day and claimed her as a granddaughter. She braided Emma's hair in the mornings. She made her favorite foods without being asked. She looked at the girl with the fierce protection of someone who understood that family is not blood but choice. Sofia had returned to the waterfront warehouse twice. The first time was necessary. She stood in the rain looking at that building, the place where she had lost 8 years, and she did not go inside. She did not need to. The past existed in memory, but it no longer owned the present. She turned and walked back to the car where Nicholas waited, and she did not look back. The trial had been brief and devastating to watch. Catherine Mercer in her designer suit, her carefully maintained facade crumbling as the prosecution laid out the details. 17 women. 8 of them had been helped by the legal network Sofia and Nicholas created. Safe houses. Real jobs. Real futures. Catherine had cultivated the appearance of charity while orchestrating human trafficking from her penthouse office. The jury took 2 hours to return a guilty verdict. At the sentencing, Catherine had tried to blame others. Hale. Market forces. Circumstance. The judge had listened with the expression of someone deeply tired of excuses. 22 years. She would be 59 when she was released, if she was released. Douglas Hale had not made it to trial. The men who came for him in the night wore no uniforms and no mercy. His screams from the street had carried across the neighborhood for exactly 4 minutes before rival families, enemies he had made years ago, dragged him into darkness. Nicholas had made one phone call. That was all that was needed. Sofia had not asked for details. Some justice exists in territories that do not bear examination. What mattered was that the women were safe. What mattered was that Emma slept without nightmares 5 nights a week now instead of every night. What mattered was that Sofia could walk into a room and breathe normally. 2 weeks after Catherine's sentencing, Sofia had started volunteering at St. Mark's shelter on the waterfront. The same shelter where she and Emma had hidden 8 years ago, where she had eaten meals served from industrial pots, where a social worker named Ruth had looked at her with genuine kindness and asked, "What do you need?" Now Sofia was the one asking. She walked through those corridors with Nicholas's lawyers, building a network, creating exits. Not charity. Never charity. Opportunity. Legal assistance. Real choices. When a woman came to Sofia with a debt she could not escape, Sofia knew exactly how to prove it fraudulent. When a child needed documentation, Sofia knew the systems. She had lived them. The volunteer coordinator had asked her why she was so driven. Sofia had answered simply, because I know what it feels like to believe you have no way out. I know what it feels like to think you are nobody. And I know what happens when someone refuses to accept that lie. Emma had started third grade 3 weeks into their life at the cottage. She had cried that first morning, new school, new city, new everything, still feeling fragile. But by the second week, she had made 3 friends. By the 4th week, she was reading chapter books and asking questions about everything. The trauma was still there. It would always be there. But so was joy now. She laughed at Nicholas's terrible jokes. She asked him to read her bedtime stories. She had stopped flinching when he moved quickly. The night before, Sofia had found a drawing Emma had made at school. Stick figures holding hands in a line. Labels in careful child handwriting: Nicholas, Sofia, Emma. A house. A garden. A dog that did not exist but could. Sofia had cried when she saw it. Now, on the porch in the September rain, Nicholas said, "I have something for you. I have been waiting for the right moment." Sofia's heart stuttered. She knew what was happening. She had sensed it for weeks in the way he looked at her, the way he made sure they were always the last ones awake at night, the way he took her hand in crowds as if he was afraid she might vanish. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Not elaborate. Not excessive. Just red velvet and the weight of intention. "I know you need independence," he said. "I know you will not accept anything you have not earned. So I am asking you to earn this. Earn this life with me. Not because I rescued you or because you saved me, but because when I imagine growing old, the only face I want to see across the table from me is yours." He opened the box. The ring was simple, white gold, a diamond that caught the rain and threw it back as light. There was an inscription on the band. Sofia had to squint to read it in the darkness. "You are far stronger than you think," it read. Sofia's vision blurred. She nodded before she could speak, then nodded again, then finally managed, "Yes. Yes, Nicholas, yes." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly. Of course it did. He had taken her hand while she slept weeks ago and had a jeweler measure it. The small details. The way he was learning her. They kissed in the rain, and from inside the cottage, they did not hear Emma stirring. The girl woke and looked out the window and saw them embracing on the porch, silhouetted against the lake. She did not call out. She simply smiled and went back to sleep, Mr. Hopsworth tucked against her chest. The rain continued to fall. It would fall all night and into the morning. But by afternoon, the clouds would break. By sunset, there would be clear sky. And when the sun finally touched the horizon, it would paint everything gold: the lake, the garden, the cottage, the life that had grown from the wreckage of 2 broken people who had found each other in a diner at 3:22 in the morning. The storm passes. And what remains is not what was taken, but what was built in the ruins. Sofia Hartley had learned this in the clearest language possible: survival is not measured in dollars or days. It is measured in the person willing to stand with you in the rain and say, without hesitation, without condition, "You are not alone, and you never will be again." If this story moved you, share it with someone fighting their own storm. Drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. Subscribe, because tomorrow we are bringing another story that will remind you why love is always worth fighting for. And remember, you are worth saving. You are worth fighting for. Your survival is not just enough. It is everything. The storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think.